Are we live? I think we're live. Welcome to another Nachi free Wednesday night live stream, where today's subject is going to be, are Hispanics white? I don't know. It depends on what political issue you're trying to exploit. And to help me answer that question is Maddie, who I'm going to let her introduce herself because I don't want to be accused of patriarchy. But
I'm a Mad Woman Muses. Everybody knows me as Maddie. I talk about a little bit of this, that, or the other, and I am Cuban by descent, so I've got that going for me.
So actually, I'll get back to that because the first question I want to ask, I kind of wanted to keep it on the whole thing of are Hispanics white, which I got the idea from watching your video, your response video to Francesco Ramsey's, are Hispanics white thing. And it was funny how towards the end of your video, you're like, I can't finish it. I can't finish it. And when I tried seeing the original video of hers, I couldn't finish watching it either. It's so frustrating. It's so frustrating to see these people just exploit the shit out of these issues.
Well, it's like the way it was always explained to me growing up from where my parents came from, because they came from Cuba, it didn't matter what your skin color was, you were Cuban.
Yeah.
So, and not everybody is the same skin color. Some people are a little lighter than others. Some people are a little darker than others. And, my parents always stressed to me that I was American, but I always said I was Cuban first because of my upbringing and because of the majority of my family being Cuban. And I never wanted to let go of that part of me to forget where my family came from, because a lot of people get here and they're like, okay, I'm American now, and they don't want anything to do with where they came from. And I'm like, I don't want to be that person. Even though I was born here, I know where my roots come from.
Same thing with me. Actually, it's funny because when I was younger, some of my own cousins kind of shamed me for being, not because I was born in Spain, but a lot of my cousins who were born here, like it's true, they didn't want anything to do with being Cuban. A lot of them refused to speak Spanish with their parents. My parents forced me to speak Spanish. I had no choice. And so a lot of cousins sort of prided themselves in being gringos, and I was like, and it was funny. So I went through a little identity crisis when I was a kid, trying to figure things out, and yet I never cared. But look, the first question that I wanted to ask you is this, which is within the title: do you identify with being white?
No, I identify as being Latina.
Okay, so I never gave a shit about that myself.
Yeah.
I never cared. I never really thought about being white. And as a matter of fact, I never really did because like I said, not only were my cousins kind of, I don't want to throw my cousins under the bus. They've taken great pride in being Cuban nowadays. But anyway, there was this little period there where, a lot of people the young people didn't want to be seen as Cuban. And then there was a lot of what we would call, I guess, gringos growing up that would also sort of shame you. So I never really felt white either. I always did feel, Hispanic or Latino,
Yeah.
And then that's the funny thing, though. I mean, there's more than enough other people that are like, no, you're white. And you see it in the news. And it was funny because with the little bit of research I started doing with this video on the one of, let me see, I think it's this one, the actual MTV decoded one. Here, let me do a little screen share really quick because this is great. This is, let's see here, screen 2.
I also did a response to Dot Mike where it was what is it to be Latino, I think was the title of the Dot Mike video, and it really made me look into ethnicity and nationalities and things of that nature. And in truth, the Hispanic and the Latino people don't consider themselves a race because they interweave their skin color with their ethnicity and with the fact that they are Hispanic or Latino. So they don't see color like a lot of other countries, this one included, does.
Well, and that's the other thing. I mean, as far as the way race was explained to me when I took a psychology course, like one of those, was a college placement psychology course that I remember taking, and my teacher had said that there's pretty much 3 major races, which are the Caucasoids, the Mongoloids and the Negroids, right? So the Caucasoids being whites, Mongoloids being Asians, and Negroids, well, being blacks. And then when I tried to do a little bit of research on this, I noticed that there's a fourth one called Australoids, which would be like the Aborigines from Australia and stuff.
Yeah.
And yet, even from Francesca Ramsey's own words, race is supposedly a social construct, which I guess it's true. Like, I don't really care to divide people any further. But I was speaking to a nephew of mine who's actually a professional biologist. And he's like, no, actually, scientifically speaking, there's enough scientists that do recognize quote unquote race. Those are the three major ones, easy to say, whites, blacks, and Asians. And a lot of it has to do with the skull structure and stuff like that,
Yeah.
But definitely Hispanics, I think they fall more under an ethnicity, or at least Latinos. And I guess it's safe to say all Hispanics are Latinos, but not all Latinos are Hispanic.
Right. Because, when I delved a little deeper into that, I took the archaeological side, not so much the biological side when I did my research. And they said there were white races, there were black races, there were native races, which I believe would be, called something different in biology terms. And then mestizo, which is a mixture of the three.
Right.
And those are how they classified the four. And I'm like, okay, I can see that. And in the fact that they always intermixed the races as we know them, they're more of an ethnicity or a nationality than we are a race. And Hispanics come from Hispaniola and Spain, mainly. Latin American actually encompasses any of the languages whose root are Latin, which would include the French. And surprisingly enough, I learned through one of my videos Romanian as well, because they derive their language from Latin roots.
Huh. Interesting. Sorry, because I was trying to see right now if I could stop this. So that was that little pregnant pause. Let me actually play this video before I get out of this. Let me see if I can.
Or Latinx if you want to be gender inclusive, which you should be.
Latinx. See, that was I had it paused on that because I wanted to show that little which you should be.
Yeah.
That is what I cannot stand about. Well, needless to say, Francesca Ramsey and the whole MTV Decoded and what we're seeing right now with this whole extreme polarization. And then here's the funny thing, because I was so pissed off when I saw this morning. I left this angry little comment, and then I wanted to show my little comment, but of course my comment's already below. It's already gone. Then I see this one, which ties in beautifully to the whole reason why I titled this, are Hispanics white only when it's convenient? And it's true, like this guy said right here. But when George Zimmerman, who is Hispanic, shoots a black person, he's called a quote-unquote white person. So Hispanics are white when they fit a certain narrative. And I was like, yeah.
Exactly.
And that was the whole thing about, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the video, which was they were trying, because I'm noticing that they're trying to like almost lump some Hispanics now into this whole thing. They're like inviting Hispanics. Hey, look, there's the victimhood entitlement shit. You're in on it too, okay? And that it's just so infuriating. It
is. They're trying to include people. They're trying to speak for people who have their own voice. And the whole problem that I have with it is they don't look at the history of the migration patterns, and they don't look at the origins of these people, because when people from Europe, let's say Spain and Portugal started going around and they found South America, there were already indigenous people there.
Right.
Okay, and they took to first exploring the area, and then they found the riches of some of these areas, and they started trying to conquer these areas and subjugate the people that were native to those areas. And that's when cultures started mixing, or other cultures started isolating themselves to get away from the conquistadors, to get away from the people that were trying to snatch them up for slave trading, because slave trading didn't only happen in Africa. Wherever they found people they figured or labeled as savage, they thought they could subjugate them and make them into slaves.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's an unfortunate tragedy of the human species. It's just it's the way we've worked for so long, you know. But anyway, continue. Sorry.
And what gets me when I first saw the video, especially that clip that you played, is the fact that the Spanish language is already inclusive. It derives its roots from Latin, and it's gendered, but like you and me, like you and I both know, when you want to include the whole group, that's what the OS at the end of the words are. That's why there's Latinos. That's why there's niños. You know, that's why there's, and then you say gente, which is neutral, but that's all the people around you.
Right.
So, you know, in order to try and change the language they want to change it, you would have to change it at its root, which would then change all the languages it derives from.
Right.
So, in essence, you're saying Latin in and of itself is wrong. And that's like, that is wrong in so many ways to me that I can't even begin to list them all.
Oh yeah, no, the way they're trying to like change the language and stuff. And then of course, to bring it into Cuba, that's at least the way it was explained to me, how they started the division in society. And not only the revolutionaries versus the anti-revolutionaries, but if you were considered an anti-revolutionary, they will call you a gusano, a worm.
Yeah.
And that's how they start chipping away. And like right now, they're really trying. It's taken me a little while to wrap my head around the whole thing that happened since Charlottesville. Because of course, when I see anybody waving a Nazi flag, I'm like, it's a Nazi, apparently.
Yeah.
But I remember seeing a video. I don't know if you ever see this guy, Atheism is Unstoppable.
I've seen a couple of his videos, yes.
And so there was one that he did that was pretty interesting. I don't know if you like the guy or not, but anyway, he did one that was pretty interesting, which was trying to like, it's not a good idea to just start blanket labeling everyone a Nazi, even when they are carrying the flag. Because I mean, that's how they start to, easily divide people, you know. And then of course now they're trying to make Trump seem like he's a voice for the Nazis, and I'm amazed at how many people in the media are like falling for this, or not even falling, they're pushing. You know,
yeah. No matter what he says, they're going to try and twist it because he condemned both sides. And yes, there are, for lack of a better term, Nazis. There are white nationalists and there are white supremacists. And yes, they did show up in Charlottesville. And it was relatively peaceful until Antifa and Black Lives Matter showed up. And, you know, that's when the infighting, that's when all the skirmishes started happening from Friday morning bleeding over into Friday night bleeding over into Saturday morning and Saturday afternoon. And the thing is, you have to ask yourself, that person holding that Nazi flag, are they actually a Nazi or are they a troll? Because let's face it, wherever you have people that are easily offended over every little thing, you're going to have trolls poking and prodding at them to see how far they can go.
Oh, for sure.
You know, it's just the nature of the beast. Now, yeah, KKK were there, Vanguard America were there, white nationalists were there, because wherever Richard Spencer goes, there they are. I mean, you know, they're inevitably going to follow him. What I found absolutely kind of comical in a way was Antifa doesn't know what real neo-Nazis are, because if the real neo-Nazis raise their heads and the real skinheads actually raise their heads, that's when the bigger problems are going to occur, because those groups don't care if they go to jail or not.
No, true. And yeah, that's where, I mean, there's so many things that I want to say at the same time, so I'm trying to pick and choose which one. I guess the first thing is that it's like, even though these people are showing up, that does not mean that they are Nazis per se, unless they are literally the socialists, like the National Socialist Party and stuff. Nonetheless, I'm not trying to defend these people at all. At all. I mean, these people would want us out of the country for sure, because we're just not white enough. That's the funny thing. Like, to them, we're not white. We're the ones that are not white according to them.
Yeah.
And how do you call it? And then that's the other sad thing, which I've already mentioned before. I mean, I think even if they had their way, if they had their white nationalist union, that their country, their ideal country, after a while, they would start weeding out anyone who's a brunette, because now it's a matter of blonde hair, blue eye.
Mm-hmm.
You got all blonde hair, blue eye. Now it's anyone who's, you know, you got to be 6 foot, you know, between 5'8" and 6 feet. You know, and it's a movement that would cannibalize itself. I don't even consider it a ideology. It's resentment and hatred. You know, which is what I'm seeing now within, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement as well. These are they're just fueled by so much resentment. And yet at the same time, you have to let these people speak. That's the weird thing, the whole thing of freedom of speech.
Yeah.
You gotta allow that. And it's amazing. The mass delusion that I was talking about is how, like, for example, this Saturday they had the rally in Boston, basically going against free speech. And I can't, it's amazing. Also, look, another question I was going to ask you is, how serious do you think this is? Do you think this is all something that's just going to fizzle out like a bad fart soon enough? Just we're getting, civil war is a little too strong of a term, but do you think we're getting to that point or something like that? Or
I don't think it's going to escalate to that point, because as much as there are cities like Charlottesville and like Berkeley that aren't willing to actually defend people that are there peacefully, you also have cities that will allow free speech rallies but have the police presence and tell them, look, at the first sign of any violence, I don't care what group they're associated with, they need to be, you know, removed from the area, because we don't want that here. There are definite mixed messages. I mean, free speech, everybody gets a platform. Everybody should be able to speak, whether the ideas are good, bad, or indifferent. You know, bad ideas shouldn't be squelched. They should be out there in the open with all the other ideas. That way people can decide for themselves whether these ideas are truly good or bad. And if the ideas are really bad, people are going to point them out.
Oh, no, for sure. But that's the only way.
You know, the more you make a bad idea taboo, the more people are going to look for that bad idea.
No, for sure. Sorry, I'm noticing this one comment from somebody here, Bobby, that said he was at the rally in Boston. And the thing is, I'm having a hard enough time sometimes with these streams. So sorry, guys, for the comments. I kind of want to just keep it as a one-on-one interview, but maybe later on towards the end, I'll especially someone like Bobby who was there, I would definitely love to invite this guy in later on to hear his perspective on it. But yeah, it's a little bit troublesome and worrying to see how, especially MSNBC. I wish I would have had that video. Yesterday, I saw this one video that somebody compiled, like, all these clips of people on MSNBC, Rachel Maddow, to say the least, Chris Hayes, well, Al Sharpton, as you could imagine, and like people who are literally trying to justify silencing free speech, like tweeting, you know, like, you know, there's a line to be drawn when it's hate speech, like, wow. And then of course the sad thing is how many people, like even people who sort of follow politics but probably don't follow it to the level that we do, because I'm a political news junkie. Mm-hmm. Like there's no way you're going to pull the wool over my eyes that Antifa and Black Lives Matter are some sort of second coming of the civil rights movement. Yeah. But they're being painted that way.
Oh yeah.
And especially Black Lives.
If you want to compare Black Lives Matter to anybody from the civil rights movements of the 60s, I would say they're more akin to Malcolm X and the Islam Brotherhood, because they were more militant about getting their civil rights message across. And they became more militant after Martin Luther King Jr. said, I don't like the way you're taking this. I'm going to do it the peaceful way. I'm going to disassociate myself from you, and I'm going to do it this way instead. You know, and what I found is today, especially on Twitter, you've got, what they didn't realize was this stuff started back with these statues and the Confederate flag and all that, really actually started back in 2012, and I want to say 2013 with the first argument, the first gatherings and rallies that people had to preserve the history and the heritage of the South and what those people stood for. And the whole message got skewed because everybody was like, well, the civil rights was a fight against slavery. when inevitably that became one of the reasons, but that wasn't one of the reasons for the start. States' rights was actually the reason for the start of the Civil War, and that's what these people were fighting for. But no, you have these people that are going, we have to take down this statue, we have to get rid of that flag, we have to get rid of this, that, and the other, because they're quote-unquote oppressive. But if you take these symbols down, you stop the conversations, you stop the questions, you stop the learning and the education.
Oh, for sure. And I'll be honest, though, I actually... Wait, is there an echo? Am I getting the echo from my own self here? Anyway, I can understand why certain communities would want to take down certain statues. You know, Robert E. Lee, I don't know. I mean, whatever. But I know that there was, and I wish I could say it right now, if I knew this one guy's name. There was supposedly one guy who was one of the founders of the KKK. I'm sorry. I totally understand if, you know, people within a community who happen to be Black Americans especially want to take down that statue. But it's critical that it be taken down peacefully, especially do it through a democratic process, not just like what they did. Oh my God, that girl that put the rope or that thing around that one statue, and they tore it down, and everyone started just kicking the statue. It's like, yeah, that for me, that's where I'm like, as much as I want to believe that this is all being exaggerated and shit, when I see scenes like that, I'm like, this is not healthy either. And then another thing, I think it's a matter of finding that fine balance. I agree with Donald Trump. Definitely both sides need to be called out. But I sometimes wonder, he could be just a little bit more diplomatic.
Eloquent?
Eloquent, diplomatic. You know, and yet I get it. The kind of person, this is something else I try to tell people, because a lot of, whenever, like especially now, with what just happened, speaking to this one friend of mine, he was like, so you're defending Trump? I can't. And I was like, dude, it's not a matter of defending Trump. But number one, he didn't say anything that was evil. He really did not. And please be careful with how you consume the news, because that's what they want you to do. They want you to think that this guy is siding with the Nazis, and he's not. And also, the way he is, yes, he's very blunt. He's like a bull in a china shop. Took for an outsider to crush the Republican Party and to then crush the Democratic Party, and especially someone like Hillary Clinton. Because, like, for example, if I would have been in that position, I would have been like, you know what? Maybe it is time we have a female as a first. If we have maybe it's time that we do have our first female president. Let her win. Not him. He definitely, he's like, the hell with that. I'm fucking winning this. And that's that kind of person. That person's not going to be nice. Yeah. You know, that person's not going to be, you know, he's not going to be Obama. And so that's the whole thing. But I do think also he does not need to be so damn combative. You know what I mean? He already won. He's the president. Like, you know?
I think what we're seeing is a product of a society who are given trophies for participation, who are being entitled, who just because they wanted her to win became indignant and angry when she didn't. And they didn't really understand how the process worked. And what I thought was absolutely hilarious was when they said, well, we need to do the electoral vote again. And she lost even more votes to Trump. I thought that part was absolutely hilarious to me, because I'm like, okay, it was already kind of close, and then you had a revote, and now it's not really any kind of close whatsoever. And she ran on identity politics. To me, every time she opened her mouth, it was a vote for me because I have a vagina. And it's like, no, that's not a qualifying factor. I'm sorry. I don't care what your genitals are. Can you run a country? That's what I want to know. You know, and the mudslinging was the worst that I had ever seen in my life, because it was Trump is this and Trump is that. And, you know, anything that he says, let's twist it and let's misquote it. Let's take him out of context. Let's make him look like a complete and total monster. But most of the country was so sick and tired of old-fashioned politics that they wanted somebody different. And unfortunately, that was Trump.
Yeah, no, for sure. And he took advantage of that. Mm-hmm. No, it's funny talking about the identity politics with Hillary Clinton. I could have sworn I remember there was one of her slogans that was almost like it's her turn. But of course, she definitely had the slogan, which I'm looking at right now, I'm with her.
Yeah.
And you can tell it was all about her. Like, and people will be like, oh no, but of course that's, you know, that you're misinterpreting that. That's, you know, for the female issues. I think ultimately she really did have the ultimate entitlement complex where she really believed she was the one that should win, you know, the election. And then the way she did it to the way she stuck it to Bernie Sanders, which I'm glad. I definitely didn't want to see Bernie Sanders. I would have taken Hillary over Bernie. But aside from her own personal, like, you know, turning it into a female thing, clearly with the identity politics, I don't know if you remember her website, which I'm curious to see if it's still up, because her website was up for a while.
Oh, wow.
Everything was race. Everything was racism. And I remember doing a video on, because one of her issues was environmental racism. Yeah, no, she had, and wait a second, I think she still has it. The video is still up, as if though she's like ready to run again. No, her website is still up, and let me look at the issues. And I think
wow,
environment, here it is. Climate, poverty. Oh no, they don't see the environmental racism anymore here. Good thing I got the screen grabs of it and stuff. Yeah. And then she was also playing the Latino card. You know, she was trying to bring that in and stuff like that. She was really trying to see that demographic. And then that's when we get back to the whole point of, are Hispanics white? It's interesting how for them at that point, Hispanics are not white.
Yeah.
Hispanics, oh, hey, they're being exploited and blah, blah, blah. And with Francesca Ramsey, it's all about all the demographics. You know, if you look at it this way, yeah, you think that there's that many whites, but no, let's not forget the Hispanics.
Yeah.
Trayvon Martin, when they were trying to make this a racial issue, and they realized that George Zimmerman's Hispanic. Oh, yeah, but he's a white Hispanic.
Right. That's why in my response to the Francesca Ramsey video, I broke down the census form she was talking about, because at that time I worked for the census from 1999 to 2002.
Cool.
And before they broke out the next long form in 2010, they wanted us, we were all in a room. They gave us all an example of the long form, and they said, we're having a problem testing this before we roll this out for the next census, because a lot of the Hispanic people are feeling singled out. So we're going to work through the questions, and you know, when anybody gets an idea as to why you think they're being singled out, you know, raise your hand, let us know. So we're working through the questions. Well, I didn't get past the first page. Are you Hispanic? Yes. See page X. I go to page X. There are 2 pages of Latin American and Hispanic countries. Where are you from? I raised my hand. They said, what? I said, you want to know why we're feeling singled out? This is why, these 2 pages right here. Why don't you ask anybody else where they're from? Why just us?
Right. And by the way, have you ever filled out a form where you were actually corrected and told, no, you're not white, you're Hispanic?
No.
I have.
Oh, wow.
I have. Well, my parents. It happened to my parents when my parents passed away. And I was filling out their death forms or whatever at the funeral parlor, which, oh my God, that's a whole other video. The ghoulish nature of that industry, but whatever. The point is, I remember as I was looking at it, because the way they had the Hispanic worded, they almost made it seem like Hispanics. I interpreted like, you know, are you Hispanic of like indigenous descent? Like, you know, let's say the indigenous Peruvians and stuff. So I was like, no. And my mother would have been one of these people like, no, yo soy blanca. Okay. Yo soy, you know, that's a whole other issue as well. The point was, I was like, no, I'm going to, you know, I guess white, whatever. And then I'll never forget the girl who was like really, really white, by the way. She was Hispanic as well, but just extremely white. And I remember saying, oh, no, you're Hispanic. And I said, I'm sorry. Well, is it because of our last name? Because my mother was quite white. And then she was like, no, it's the way that we have to fill out these demographics. You're Hispanic. And just please, whatever. I remember she filled it out for me. I'm like, okay, whatever, man. And that was around the time, after the whole thing with Trayvon Martin, and I don't know to what degree that might have played into it, where it became such an issue. Because I also thought it was just one of those questions that if I didn't even fill it out, it wouldn't have mattered. My parents are dead anyway, But no, apparently they're Hispanic, not white. Like, holy shit.
I always got the opposite. They always looked at me when it came up in conversation. I told them I was Cuban. The next thing out of their mouth would be, "You don't look Cuban." Well, what is the Cuban supposed to look like? Could you cue me in, please? Because, if you meet the rest of my family, they're Cuban, so that kind of makes me one too. Or after a while, I kind of joked about it. I said, "I'm the spy they send in to the Americans to report back to the rest of the Cubans to see how everything is going." And then I think on a live stream that I did a face reveal, they looked at me and they said, "Oh my God, you look more Italian than Cuban." I said, "Well, yeah, it's in there somewhere."
No, it's true. And I think most Hispanics, there's a reason why most Hispanics kind of almost look like Arabs and Middle Easterns. If you took Fidel Castro's face and Osama bin Laden's face, and you switched out the turban and the little fucking guerrillero hat, they almost look the same, because we are actually, or at least most Hispanics, we're descendants of the Moors that took over Spain and stuff. Mm-hmm. You have that. And that has made me somewhat of an ethnic chameleon. So in the winter, when my tan is not as dark, like right now, that's what I'm not even all that dark right now. Sometimes I get white dark. But in the winter, I'm more like a white guy, And I've had people just assume that I was white and not Hispanic. I'll never forget when I used to work at this one bar. This one guy, because I got 2 or 3 in the morning, when fucking people are drunk, the truth always comes out. So this guy comes out, and he was actually Greek, and he's just on the sidewalk. "I am a racist." And I'm like, what? Like I thought he was mentioning some place from Greece that he was at. I was like, racist? I was like, racist. I said, sorry, man, what are you talking about? What are you saying? He's like, "I am a racist." And I was like, hey, wow, you really want to just call that out here, out in the open? And it was like, fucking whatever. And so he assumed that I was Greek as well. So he just starts letting it out. And the thing was, I used to work as a bouncer at this one little strip club that had, there was a lot of blacks and Hispanic chicks working the floor. And I remember it was like, "I'm so tired of all these blacks and these brown chicks." And I was like, wow, you're really just fucking letting it fly. And at one point, he's like, "Especially all these Hispanic Latinas that can't even speak the language." I said, "Dude, I'm Cuban." Okay? So I don't know. And he looked at me like, "Oh, I thought you were Greek." I really don't care, because the guy was whatever. He was just a fucking classic drunk. Guy looked like my brother. I mean, him and my brother were like dead ringers. Mm-hmm. And I remember one other night, because now that he knew I was Hispanic and stuff, he sort of apologized. And I'll never forget, he also told me, "Yeah, but you're okay." You're one of the good ones. He was like, "You're one of the good ones." And I'm like, all right, dude, whatever. So I never took the guy very seriously. And then one time I wanted to take a picture of him and tell him, "Hey, look, I want to actually send this picture to my brother, because you and my brother look so much alike." And I'll never forget, he was like, yeah, but I'm white, okay? Look at this. And he pulled down his shirt to show me the tan. I was like, dude, does it really matter that much to you if you're white? And that I never understood.
I always, working at convenience stores, whenever construction crews came in, most of them were either San Salvador, El Salvador, Mexico, that mixture of a construction crew. And I'd hear them mumbling in Spanish amongst themselves, A couple of them said something about me. And so I waited till they got to the register. When I rung them up, I told them their total in Spanish. Right. Their eyes got as big as saucers. And one of them looked at me and said, "Are you Puerto Rican?" I must have looked at him with eyes that were boring into his very soul, because his friend next to him went, "She's Cuban. She's Cuban. Look, she's Cuban. Look at the face. She's Cuban." Like, do we have that bad of a reputation when it comes to our temper? Holy crap.
No, that's the other funny thing that I kind of wanted to get into, the different Hispanic the different nationalities, and like there are certain. I mean, clearly Argentinians, I could always just listen to them, you know, in their accent. Even though Paraguayans seem to have that same accent. Colombians, I can sort of tell. I think Colombians speak, in my opinion, the cleanest Spanish of all the Hispanics. Mexicans very quickly, even though it gets a little confusing when it's Mexicans or Guatemalans and stuff like that. Sometimes I get a little confused. Cubans, I think they do. They kind of almost stand out, especially once they start talking politics. You already know.
Yeah.
That. And then that's the thing. Like in coming back to whether Hispanics or white, I think, yeah, maybe Cubans are the ones that probably have the most white, because of all the different ethnicities that there are out there. I think the Hispanic ethnicity, as well, I consider Brazilians almost Hispanic. You know, it's, we're the only ones that seem to have the three major races that I mentioned before: the whites, the blacks, and the Asians. You kind of have that within the entire Hispanic community. And because most of the indigenous people, they're considered Asians. They're you know, at least racially speaking, they descended from Asian stuff. So that's why there's a lot of Mexicans that, if they're not too dark, they can almost pass as Asians, you know. And so that's the interesting thing. At least Cubans do seem to have a little bit more of that whiteness to them, I guess, you know. But yeah, it's so interesting to see how it just shifts, and it depends on who's trying to exploit what issue.
Oh yeah.
White, when we're Hispanic.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just find that.
When I worked in the field for the Census Bureau, I had one field rep say, "Can you come with me? I've got to do this interview, and they're Mexican." I went, "Okay." She goes, "I need a translator." "All right, I'll go with you." So we go up there. We knock on the door. The kid comes around the corner, and, you know, I introduce ourselves and ask him, you know, if so-and-so's at the house. And he goes, "Sure, I'll go get him." Turn the corner. First thing I said was, "They're not Mexican." She goes, "How do you know?" I said, "First of all, they don't look Mexican. Second of all, Mexicans don't wear $80 shirts."
Second, Mexicans don't wear what? What shirts?
$80 shirts. This guy was wearing una guayabera.
Ah.
Yeah, I said, yeah, they no. So we do the interview, you know, the kid, and "Where are you from?" And the guy says, "San Salvador." And she looked over at me, and I looked over at her like, "Told you." I didn't say it out loud. I was just like, "Told you." So on the way home, she goes, "Holy crap, this guy spends $1,000 a month on clothes." I said, "Yes. Mexicans don't spend that much. They go to Goodwill, Walmart. They don't spend that much on clothes." I said, "Besides, they look different." She goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "Mexicans' faces are more rounded. This guy was a little more gaunt. You know, he was a little more olive complected. Mexicans tend to be a little more leathery in their skin because they're out in the sun more." She goes, "Oh, now you're being..." I said, "Don't say I'm being racist. I'm being truthful."
That's the thing, and that's what I really want to talk on. The cool thing is that I guess we could get away with it, you know. Mm-hmm. I've never felt that offensiveness, like talking to someone like Francesco Ramsey, where any little thing sets her off.
Yeah.
Even when I've had people try to convince me that Castro was like a savior to the Cuban people with a damn Che Guevara shirt, even then I'm like, dude, I can manage to contain myself. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I wish the Francesco Ramseys and like that girl that she's got on that show, the Hispanic girl and stuff. I wish more people could just have that. Just drop those offensive lines. I mean, yeah. Christ's sakes, how difficult is it? But I also...
We have someone here that lives with us. His name is Dennis. Well, we call him Dennis. His actual first name is a little hard to pronounce. He's actually his parents are from Brazil and Mexico, so he's mixed in that way, and he's black. And he says the hardest time that he has around other people is, "Man, you black." And he'll look at him and go, "No, I'm Mexican." Dark brown. I mean, you know, it's like, you can't, if you looked at him and did not know him, you would think he was a black guy. But he's like, "No, I'm Portuguese and Mexican. Figure that one out." And that's his usual response. You know, and it's hilarious when people, you know, trying to explain to people the differences in what we look like from a Cuban versus a Spaniard, and a Spaniard versus somebody from Brazil. it's hard, you know, and it didn't hit me until my coworker back then said something, and then that little phrase in the back of my head just kind of popped in there, and it was like, apparently to her, we all look alike. But I didn't see it as a racist kind of phrase. I saw it as just, she wasn't around enough Hispanic and Latino people to actually see the differences.
Right.
You know, so to me, that's not more of a racist statement. It's more of a statement out of ignorance and not being exposed to enough of that ethnicity to notice the differences.
No, for sure. And well, I'm assuming you probably used to watch Get Outside USA, right?
Mm.
And I remember, I'll never forget that episode where Joe, gets into a fight with a black guy, and but that black guy happens to be his sister's like computer buddy from school. Anyway, they see each other at home, and like they're like, "Oh my God, they're gonna probably get into a fight again." And there was clearly a racial tension going on between whites and blacks. And the show was back in the late 70s. This goes going on. But then they have a friend of the family from Cuba who happens to be black that shows up. And then all of a sudden, that guy is like all friendly with Joe and stuff like that. And then the American black guy is like, "Hey, man, why are you so friendly with him, bro? That guy's blacker than I am." And Joe's like, Cheito's not black, man. He's Cuban.
Yeah.
And I remember, I'm sure you know who this guy Tariq Nasheed is.
Yes.
No. Anyway, I did a video on that guy because that guy, I mean, I should have, well, I was pretty incensed, but managed to, I'm not going to fucking block the guy's video. I didn't flag his video or anything. That's another thing. Like, as much as people like that piss me off, and look, I'm almost clenching my fists. I still also know when to just, let the anger wash over me and stuff. But he did a video after Castro died, which I don't know if you're familiar with that video, where he's actually praising Castro, and he's saying that any of the Cubans who celebrated Castro's death are really just suspected white supremacists. And you're like, dude, are you fucking out of your mind, bro?
Yeah, you want to slap these people. You really, really do. Because I think in my last video I did that was Cuba related, I literally showed what I thought was appropriate for my video, pictures of the hospitals down there in Cuba. There were way worse pictures on this website that I found, and that website is linked in the description below. And it even included a picture of the morgue where the deceased were stacked like cordwood. I didn't want to put that picture in my video because to me, I would have been disrespecting those people in the video, in that picture, in my opinion, because that's just horrific. Because everybody that says, "Oh, they have the best healthcare in the world," yes, for Fidel Castro and Raul Castro's chosen elite, they have top of the line healthcare. For everybody else, not really. I described the hospitals as something I wouldn't even take my dog to if he was sick.
Yeah, I remember hearing that. Yeah, have you ever been to Cuba?
I have not. I do want to go, but not as long as Raul is there.
No, I don't blame you. I went in, and I can say it now because it's already past the statute of limitations. I went in 2006, which, by the way, that's another thing. I firmly believe that Cubans should, Americans especially, should be allowed to travel to Cuba. That's one thing, like, with all these issues and all this polarization, I think part of the reason why we get all this polarization is because there's so many little details and so many little, I hate the word nuance, but I guess you have to use it. There's so many little things to these issues. And for example, I always thought to myself, it is not right of certain people who left a communist dictatorship in Cuba to now come to the United States and dictate a somewhat dictatorial policy which restricts travel. I mean, you can't do that. And plus, I think if people would have been allowed to freely travel back and forth to Cuba, I wonder to what extent we would have been able to have maybe brought down that dictatorship from inside or something. You know what I mean?
Well, not only that, but and I know as well that even if we were to get visas to travel down there, we would only be able to go where they wanted us to. in order for people to actually see Cuba as it is today, the travel needs to be unrestricted once they get there. They need to be able to see the good, the bad, and the ugly, not just the good, the way, Raul wants to depict it. Because, they're going to be shuttled to a resort. They're going to be given the very best food, the very best accommodations. Tours are going to be to the best places in Cuba. So they're never going to see the slums. They're never going to see what happens to the rest of the Cuban nationals.
I know, for sure. And the reason why I was bringing that up, especially when you mentioned the whole thing about healthcare, is because back when I went, if there was one issue that I do remember that a couple of my relatives over there were like, bitching about were the little asthma inhalers. And they were like, these little fucking asthma inhalers like cost, I forgot what percentage of their salary. And they were only allowed to have one asthma inhaler per month. That's all they were rationed. And even then it wasn't free. Okay. And so, and I didn't really give much thought when they were telling me it, because I felt horrible. Like, what can I do? I didn't come here with a bunch of asthma inhalers. But they were telling me, like, how criminal, because I'm sorry, there's so many details I want to share. Let me stick to this one idea. But anyway, with the asthma inhaler, this one particular relative of mine, because this one relative of mine, he had like we say in Spanish, no tenía pelos en la lengua,
Mm-hmm.
She didn't care who hurt her. And so she was clearly not part of the Communist Party, or she never wanted to support that. She, of all the relatives that I got to visit, she was like at the lowest rung of the ladder. Like, her living conditions were really bad. And so for her and this other one of her neighbors, the asthma inhalers were a real issue, which I never knew. They were like, shit, we're only allowed one asthma inhaler. And for anyone who has asthma, you know that you go through these things almost like in a matter of days. And you need more than one a month. And they had to get their other asthma inhalers through the black market. And there's where those asthma inhalers are expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Now, come Michael Moore, because I think if I'm not mistaken, when he came out with that movie Sicko,
Mm-hmm.
where he goes, I think it was that same damn year. And at that time, that was another reason why I went to Cuba, because back then I used to write for Metro newspaper as a freelancer. They would just have my articles up in New York, because I think I was like the only person in New York who was writing negatively about pollution and stuff, especially after he stepped down and it was like a hot issue, and especially with the Che Guevara shirts. I think I was like one of the few people in New York that would actually write about that publicly. Like, this is bullshit. And so like, oh yeah, fucking, that's a unique perspective. So they actually paid me to go see the Sicko movie. I was like, I'm not fucking paying to see that movie. They're like, well, can you do a review on the movie? I'm like, okay, if that's the case, I'll go and whatever. So I go review the movie, and the irony of all the things that Michael Moore chooses to show about Cuba are the damn asthma inhalers. And how over there, they're just 5 cents. And I'm like, and I remember, I'll never forget, my wife had to like hold me down, because people were like, oh, like you can hear the people in the audience. They're like, oh my God, because they were trying to make it seem like it's free and shit. I actually had to get up, and I was like, it's not free. Like, grabbed me, like, sat me. I didn't really stand up entirely, but I was kind of like getting up, which sat me sort of back into my seat. And I had to yell that out, and everybody just kind of went quiet. It was, why did this guy just yell this out? Because it was so goddamn frustrating. That's the thing about someone like Michael Moore. You're assuming this guy's a journalist. He didn't scratch very, very deep beneath that surface.
No.
Like, this guy, I am not a journalist. I'm just another rube on YouTube. And back then, even though I was writing for that newspaper, I didn't consider myself a journalist. I'm just an opinion writer.
Yeah.
And just that little bit, I was able to see, like, that mechanism. Like, how is it possible? And that just goes to show the corruption. That government has such a stranglehold on that population that they know where everything goes. I mean, if they're rationing out asthma inhalers, per one person for, how do you call it, per the month, they know that there's a whole black market of it.
Mm-hmm.
And for him not to see that, and for him to try to present it that they're almost free for Cubans, and it's amazing misinformation that you get.
He's more of a propagandist, in my opinion, than he is a journalist. Because, I mean, I've had relatives. I don't want to say fortunate, but I was able to meet a couple of my relatives that came from Cuba on visas to see us here in the United States. And one was a great uncle, and the other one was a great aunt. And the great uncle, when we picked him up, he was wearing what we would consider throwaway clothes, rags, worn out. And, you know, so we took him around. We bought him clothes. We bought him shoes and the whole 9 yards. And he was absolutely loving it. He'd go everywhere with blue jeans on, tennis shoes, ball cap, T-shirt, stuff we take for granted every day. Then the time came for him to go back down to Cuba, and he was back in the rags again. And I said, why are you dressing in that when we bought you all of these clothes? And he said, I will explain this to you. If I were to get off the airplane with the things that you have been seeing me wear the entire time I was here, I would be lucky if I got to my house with my calzoncillos on. Because we don't have these luxuries there. And he called our everyday clothes luxuries. And I'm like, okay. And that started changing my perspective of everything from there on out. And my grand aunt was actually married to somebody that was a member of the Communist Party. And she would wait till he left so she could take her Catholic statues of saints out and everything and clean them and pray to them and read her Bible, because that was not allowed in that house. She was babysitting some grandkids, and she said they got quiet. And as you do when children get quiet, you go looking to see what they've gotten into. And they got into my cabinet where all my saints were. So I walk in with a smile on my face. You know, the grandfather's not there. So what are you doing playing with grandma's dolls? And they said, well, that's not a doll. That's Santa Barbara. That's St. Jude. They started naming off all the saints. And she said, I had to tell him, shh, and don't tell grandpa that grandma has these. Otherwise, you're not going to see your grandma again.
Yeah,
and
no,
I was like, holy crap. What is going on down there? I was 11 at the time listening to this, and the glaring question in the back of my head was, what is going on down there?
No, it's amazing how families would divide themselves. Like with my dad, he came from 6 brothers and sisters, and it was right down the middle. 3 of them, for whatever reason, they thought that Fidel Castro was a savior and all that shit. They stayed behind. And my dad, my uncle, and my other aunt, they were like, we cannot put up with this shit. This is a dictatorship. You know, because I think that's another important thing to point out. Granted, it's communism, but I think what a lot of people fail to realize is that it's a dictatorship. You know what I mean? Like, people don't really, like, because I've heard enough people try to justify this. Like, well, you know, that's just a different way of looking at things. And it's like, you don't seem to get that in order to have communism, you need a dictatorship. And it needs to be almost murderous, because that's the only way you're going to enforce this. And people, that's one of the things that I just cannot stand. Like, the people who think that it's just a point of view. You know, you say tomato, I say tomato. I'm like, you really don't fucking get it, do you?
No,
and
they
the
don't.
sad part about it is, you know, the family of mine, and here's another classic one. Just my own mother, who supported Castro at first, and her sister. That's another interesting thing. The people who could see it and the people who don't. My aunt got it right away. Back in like 1961 is when she left. She was like, fuck this. She left, I think, right before the Bay of Pigs and stuff. But she already saw it. My mother was like, we got to give it a chance. You never know, blah, blah, blah. My mother ended up in a forced labor camp, you know, towards the end, because by the time she decided to leave, which was like 1970, they were like, hey, you can leave, but you're going to pay a price now. Number one, everything's ours, which wasn't even much. My parents were like middle class. They didn't like have a business or anything like that. They were middle class. Only what they could stick into 2 suitcases. And you owe us basically a year in El Campo, you know, going over to working in forced labor camps.
It was like my mom said she was 16 when she left. So she left in 66, 65, 66. And she saw the transition from Batista to Castro. And she said, under Batista, And she goes, yes, I will admit, because to say that he was the greatest would be lying through my teeth. Batista was no saint either. But under Batista, we had businesses, we owned farms. We were thriving under Batista, even though he was squandering the government's money on all these projects and things that were going on at the time and sinking the money into casinos in order to court the mobsters from, America and things of that nature. She goes, and here comes Castro to, quote unquote, liberate us. And the next thing we know, all of our farms and businesses are taken away because everybody is going to be made equal, whether we want to be equal or not. And what he meant by equality was equal in the state of suffering. And we realized that, we needed to get out of here in order to be able to do what we wanted to do without repercussions.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something else I wish more people understood. I lived in England for like about a year and a half, and not all English people, of course, but enough British people, they have an admiration. It's not even a soft spot for Fidel Castro, an outright admiration for this guy. And when I was first starting to learn this, because I never gave a shit that much about Cuban politics when I was younger, I was so sick and I knew that Fidel Castro was a bad guy when I was younger. That much I knew. But I didn't really even understand that much of the difference between communism and capitalism and stuff like that. And I knew he was a dictator, but I didn't realize that he was a communist dictator. And I ended up living in England because of a job, and that was my first introduction to people who admired Fidel Castro. And the ironic thing was that this guy, he was British, was raised in Britain, but he was actually Chilean. He was from Chile. And he was my boss. And within like the second or third day that I'm at his job, at the job, I'm sitting there at the desk talking to him, and I noticed he's got a portrait of Fidel Castro behind him. And this is how clueless I was at the time. And I was like, isn't that guy that my parents hate? Like, that guy, but it was like this black and white photograph of him smoking a cigar, and it was framed and everything. And I was like, and then he followed my eyesight. He's like, oh, that's right. You're Cuban. You're from Miami. He's like, you have no idea what this man has done for your people. And I was like, what? Like, that was the first time I ever heard anybody tell me this. By the way, that was when I had moved to New York. Mm-hmm. And then from New York, I went to London. And I was like, sorry. He's like, oh, yes, no, the education and the free healthcare. Oh, my God, if only you guys had that here in America as well. I was like, what the fuck? And I didn't dare answer back because I had just gotten the job. He was my boss. And plus, I had no arguments for it. I was just like, whatever. And then little by little, as I started working with other coworkers, I started realizing these people really admired Fidel. And they have this thing, like I remember starting to hear, and I even read this in The Lonely Planet. I don't know if Lonely Planet has changed their damn little history on Cuba with the little history section. But the phrase was that Castro was forced into communism.
Oh, okay.
No, this guy knew exactly what he was doing from day one, from the time before he even went to the Sierra Maestra Mountains. This guy was a power-hungry psychopath. Because if I'm not mistaken, in his college days, he was a thug, and he wanted to be president of the student body council. And it wasn't enough to just be elected; he would threaten other students.
Yeah.
And people don't seem to get that. They don't understand the psychopathy of these dictators. And that's what scares me. How many people don't see that, and particularly people who are quote unquote intellectuals. Because by the way, the company that I was working for, it was a magazine that covered international bank meetings. So that was the other thing, the sympathy that some of these people had for communism, yet they were working for like the most uber capitalistic financial publication possible. And they were very erudite, well-traveled, well-read journalists and stuff like that. And I was just amazed. So I had to like slowly build up, like that's when I started really asking my parents about what, are these people right? Or are you like, did my family risk their lives leaving Cuba for like no good reason? Or what the fuck? And then slowly as I started learning this, and then I started I wouldn't even say debating, just having conversations with these people at dinner. It was interesting to see, like, their arguments just fall apart. Mm-hmm. And you start to see that facade of quote unquote intellect. You're like, oh, wait a second, you're not that intelligent. You know what I mean? Because if you don't see, you're not the intellectual that you portend to be.
Yeah. Well, it's like all these people that are pro-communist, they overlook the most obvious example of the fact that communism doesn't work. And I'm not talking about Cuba. Pre-communist Venezuela before Chavez. And then what Chavez did when he took power. Because let's face it, that's what he did. He took power. He seized it from the government and he turned it into a communist country. And it has fallen into ruin. And the person after him is just like him. And these people, they look at these countries, they look at Cuba, they look at Venezuela, they see what's going on in these countries, and they're like, well, communism is great. What glasses are you wearing? Maybe you need to change your prescription.
Or it's always the communism works, you're just not doing it right.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. It does work. It's just not doing it right. And it is amazing. Like still, like, and on NPR, like I've just given up on so many of these. Like, NPR, I could barely listen to them anymore in the mornings. And the fact that they actually host Democracy Now! I don't know if you ever heard Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman. Mm-hmm. Oh, I haven't watched them, so I don't know what they've been saying lately about Venezuela. I don't know how much more they could deny what's going on in Venezuela. But they just idolized Hugo Chavez. And I remember one of the, when I was trying to do a little bit of research, and I get turned off. Like there comes a point where I just cannot do certain videos. And I want to communicate it, but it disturbs me so much. I remember seeing this one video where they were jokingly asking Hugo Chavez what he thought about the fact that George Bush was calling him a dictator. And like, he is. And this was already towards the end. It's like, are you not watching the press conferences that this guy has where he absolutely humiliates journalists, and not in the way that Donald Trump does, which, by the way, I wish Donald Trump would kind of ease up a little bit on, hey, you're fake news and all that. He's not that, like Donald Trump. If you see the Hugo Chavez when he deals with the journalists, you could almost tell there's a minder who's like writing down that journalist's name. That guy's going to probably either disappear or something's going to happen to that guy for asking a question. That doesn't happen here. Here, the most you get is, you're fake news, shut up.
Yeah.
Over there.
Well, it's like when I was doing research for the documentary series I'm doing on Cuba, I found an old clip of where he was on, where Fidel was on a question and answer panel. And he was sitting there with a translator. Well, they would ask him questions. The translator would translate it. And there was one question about free press and free speech. And when it was translated, before he gave his answer in English, he closed his eyes, he shook his head, and then he began to speak. And I'm like, okay, if that doesn't tell you people that he's about to feed you a line of bull right now, I don't know what does.
Yeah.
Because that was just so telling to me. And I was like, yeah, and these people are, oh, well, he's so great. No, I had people look at me after his death and go, well, they did do interviews in Cuba. I said, how much you want to bet for every person that Cuban national was on the camera? There was somebody standing behind the camera with a script and a gun.
Yeah. No, that was the other amazing thing. Barbara Walters and her little romance, literal romance. And oh, damn, I should have gotten these books. Have you ever heard of this author called Humberto Fontova?
Mm-mm.
Oh, that guy is great. He's written quite a few really great books on Castro, and one of them is called Fidel. I think it's called, let me look it up here. Fidel, Hollywood's Favorite Dictator, or something like that, or The Longest Romance. I think that's another one. Let me look up his books. And it's just, I bring this guy up. I'm sorry, because right now I was also looking at the comments. And by the way, for anybody who is watching, I'm sorry that I'm first of all, I'm really wrapped up in the conversation. So that's the first thing. That's sorry, I haven't really been checking up on the comments, but I did want to get back to the comments and stuff like that. With this guy, oh yeah, that's right, with Barbara Walters and stuff. And anyway, in his book Fidel, we see where he's got the bibliography. He mentions so many journalists, like people who I thought I admired, people like Mike Wallace and stuff. And they're just like, what? People who just praise this guy. And what amazes me, how can you be so blind? You know, especially if you're someone of a seemingly high IQ to hold a job like that.
Yeah.
And I would love to understand that psychology. Like, what is it? Because I don't think it was. I am willing to believe that, you know, Barbara Walters was not paid by Fidel Castro.
I think I mean, as much as we hate to give him credit for things, he was an intelligent man.
Oh, no, yeah. So
he could turn on the charm when he wanted to. And I think in a lot of those interviews, the questions were pre-approved to make him look good.
Right.
So, you know, that's what I chalked it up to be, the fact that the interview was already skewed before he sat down and started answering questions. He was already holding all the cards.
Right.
You know, it was just a matter of turning on the charm and, you know, putting the right answers out to the questions that he already knew. And there were probably, and I'm not going to dispute it, there were probably some journalists that absolutely loved the guy for some reason or another. And it turns my stomach. I mean, whenever somebody says something, excuse me, especially Gazi Kadzo, he did a video praising, you know, Castro was all about civil rights. And I wanted to go, okay, no, he wasn't. No, you people just really don't. And neither is his brother. Raul is just as bad. I remember a short video clip where Obama went to Cuba to visit, and he went to shake Raul's hand, and Raul went out of his way on camera to grab Obama's sleeve. He didn't even want to touch the man. I'm like, okay, how does this scream civil rights?
Yeah, exactly. I know. That's amazing.
You know, back to Che Guevara and stuff, because we discussed this, I think, on another stream about me working at Party City and, you know, Halloween.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, Halloween is Party City's Christmas, and I can't remember the year it was, but there's always a wall in Party City where you can buy masks. And this particular year, I opened the box, and there were Che Guevara masks, and I'm pointing at these things, and I'm going, why are these in the box? Why are we selling these? Well, you know, people are wearing the shirts, so we're selling the masks. Please don't tell me you're selling these in Miami. Well, yeah, they're going to all the stores all over the U.S. No, there's going to be a riot or a boycott or some sort of protest or something. Oh, no, there isn't. Next day in the news. Cubans protest local Party City for Che Guevara mask. I'm walking into work and they're like, you called it. They don't like the man. He helped Castro get power. Why would you think they want to walk into a Party City and buy his face?
And yet, look, I defend the right for anybody to wear that shit.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Horrible judgment. And speaking of Party City and MTV's Decoded, let me share this little video here that I definitely wanted to show. I'm sure you've probably seen this one. The one about Cinco de Mayo and a cultural appropriation.
Oh, I wanted that one on purpose so I didn't yell.
Let me present to everyone. Here we go.
Or poncho for that matter. Basically, if you can buy it at a party supply store, forget about it. And yeah.
Oh my God. And like even there, like look the smugness on this girl's face.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and if you can buy it there, forget about it. Like, who the hell are you to tell me what I can wear, what I cannot wear?
Exactly.
And that's the other thing. Like, and here's one more thing that I want to show on Francesca Ramsey. It's that authoritarian streak to these people. And here we go.
Can I point
this made me cringe watching it. I don't know, the audience doesn't know if they should clap or boo or be silent. They just don't know what to do. They're so conflicted.
Yes, clap!
Wow.
Anyway, not to get too much of that, because that was somebody else's video. I was trying to find the original one.
Yeah.
But that was her on Larry Wilmore, when she was actually making the case that it's okay if you're in college if you don't want any white students to share your room with you, you should be able to put that on the application. And even Larry Wilmore was like, that's racist.
Yeah.
Larry Wilmore is another one of these, I'm not going to say a race hustler, I'm going to give the guy the benefit of the doubt and stuff. But even he was like, no, this is a problem. And then on that panel, there was another girl that worked for BuzzFeed. And even the BuzzFeed girl was like, no, that's not good.
No.
But Francesca Ramsey just doubling down, like,
Mm-hmm. It's amazing, but you can't be racist against white people because they've completely changed the definition of the word, racist or being prejudiced or anything like that. And it's like, no, you can't change the word to fit your narrative. Prejudice is prejudice. If you hate an entire race just because of the color of their skin, you're racist. It doesn't matter what your skin color is. You're judging an entire race because of what they look like. That's racism. You can't do that. And now they're wondering, and see, this is what I get to on some of my news shows. They're wondering why the KKK and all these people are rearing their heads. And it's like, well, you can only push people so far before they start pushing back. They're getting tired of being called racist and every buzzword in the dictionary that you can think of throwing at them. They're getting tired of being told to shut up and sit down, that they're the oppressor and stuff like that. When if you look at the laws in our country, especially affirmative action, anybody that's a minority has more of a chance of getting a job simply because they're a minority than a white person does in this country because of that law. They're not oppressed. They're crying over nothing.
That's where, again, some nuance. I hate that word, and it's funny because that's the other thing. When I say they, I'm talking about people like on the left and what I would consider regressives. Because I almost have a little more respect for people on the quote-unquote left, but these regressives. I remember when the 2008 election, they were all talking about nuance. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, I never really heard that word that much before, but I definitely knew what nuance meant, because I remember the only times I ever stumbled into that word were like in art books when they were talking about shades, color and stuff like that. So when it came to Obama was very nuanced, which I remember thinking the irony. I was like, are you guys saying that he's nuanced because he's not entirely black? I don't know, whatever. Anyway, the point is, I was like, that's quite ironic. They were all about nuance back then. Now there's real need for nuance. Now there's real need to not just go around falsely accusing people of racism, Nazism, and all this shit. And now there's no nuance. No. It's so fucking black and white.
When everybody's a racist, nobody's a racist. When everybody's a Nazi, nobody's a Nazi. You're taking the meaning out of the word by calling everybody that word.
Yeah.
You're diminishing it.
And by the way, one of the things that I'm also starting to realize, and I've heard enough other people talk about it. So, but in a weird way, I want to take it down almost to the molecular level, because this is really, it's like a chemical reaction. How everything has a equal and opposite reaction, and that's why I was trying to say before about nuance. Like there are legitimate grievances, and like I told you, I've met people who openly told me they're racist, and not just that Greek guy. Other people recently, to top it off, people who are too shamelessly saying, I'm a racist. But there's a big difference between assholes who are racist on a one-to-one basis and institutionalized racism, and that's nuance we fucking need.
Yeah.
But anyway, what I was trying to get to is that you have to notice that there are legitimate grievances, and I can see why, they're not stopping, but they're taking it too far. So it's like this pendulum that just swings.
Yeah.
And I think with Obama, they really pushed it. And I wonder to what degree they pushed it, because once Obama became president, that grievance industry lost a lot of its validation. And I especially noticed that with Al Sharpton's show on MSNBC, and I'm paraphrasing it. I remember, like, you know, the intro, like one of the commercials that they had for the show, and it was basically alluding to, hey, yeah, Obama became president. That's great, but don't think that the struggle is ended. You know, don't think. And basically, the way at least I was reading into it, I'll admit I was reading into it, was basically like Al Sharpton saying, hey, I'm still relevant. Okay, I'm still going to make money off this issue. And evidently, just the other day in the news, I read about how, let me see, because I actually had saved this article. Like, he has the influence and the power to be able to call for peace, but he doesn't. People's head, like a threat. And let me see, here it is. I'll find it right now. Because he's like, at any moment right now, a match can set this all off.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, dude. You're just, let me see that. I'm trying to find it right now. Anyway. Yeah. So you have that. You have that pendulum. And I think I think we're seeing a lot of this now, especially with Black Lives Matter and stuff, because you have enough people who are trying to exploit this for all it's worth. And then you have all these young people who, meanwhile, they latch onto it and they're almost used as a cudgel.
Yeah. But
then they're pushing that so much that now it's like, you know, it's like having dirt under the rug or something like that. I forgot that analogy that people use. That dirt's got to come out somewhere, and they're kind of like pushing this, and now you're getting real white supremacists. They're really now, you know, rearing their ugly heads.
Yeah.
And I wonder, how do we stop this? At one point, like, as much as I can't stand the Tariq Nasheeds for sure, and the Francesca Ramseys and all that, I wonder, there's, for those of us who are calling that shit out, I think, at least for me, I feel like I got to be a little careful too, because when you start fighting fire with fire, you just end up with an inferno too.
Yeah.
You know? But I don't know what you think about that.
But I mean, it's the KKK. Some people would argue that they've always been active, and the last time that they were active that I remember before recently was the last time they came out in public was when the NAACP decided that they were going to do a Black Pride March in Forsyth County here in Georgia. Now, for people that don't know, Forsyth County in Georgia is the one of the 159 counties in Georgia that is at least 95 to 90% white. This is pretty much the seat of where a lot of the KKK people live, gather, meet, and talk. And they were peaceful. Nobody had heard from them. They were keeping their heads relatively in the sand because they're on a watch list. Well, here comes the NAACP. Out came the KKK to counter-protest their protest. And when somebody asked them in the press why they were coming out against this, you know, the march, the only thing that Grand Dragon said was, out of the 159 counties, why ours? Why did they have to come here if they weren't looking for some sort of trouble?
Yeah.
You know, and you have to ask yourself, you know, those. I saw the website for Vanguard America, and I saw the guy that put everything together for Charlottesville, and at the end of his planning thing where he told everybody when and where it was going to happen, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't have it in front of me, it was to the effect of, you know who else is going to show up? This should be fun. So, you know, it was like, okay, they knew they were coming. They were planning for Antifa and BLM to show up, so they were already ready for a fight. But then again, some people would say, well, yeah, they were instigating it. But the problem is, no matter where these people go, Antifa and BLM are going to be there. These are the quote-unquote counter-protesters that the liberal media does not want to label. They don't want to tie a name to them. You know, they'll say white nationalists and white supremacists all day long. You know, Antifa shows up to counter protest. There were counter protesters that showed up at the rally today. Call them out. Quit being hypocrites. You're sitting there jumping on everybody else for not calling out the right. Now that we're calling out the quote unquote alt-right, why don't you do your job and call out the other side?
Yeah. No, some of them have actually gone as far as this other little phrase that I saw bandied about for a little bit there, peace through violence. They're like trying to, some of them, they know they can't justify this. And so they're doing that. And CNN is, oh my God, it's CNN trying to like, already now I'm starting to see this as becoming a meme. They're trying to make it seem like what happened in Barcelona with the van is a copycat of Charlottesville. I was born in Barcelona. I'm not going to speak like as if though I'm an expert on Barcelona, but I remember being in Barcelona a couple of years ago with my parents and stuff. I can guarantee you the people in Barcelona don't give three shits about what goes on in the United States, much less Charlottesville. They got their own fucking problems. And even now that it's come out that it was clearly ISIS took credit for it and all that, still today in Yahoo News, somebody is still running with that little ball. Like, no, it's a copycat from Charlottesville. I'm like, what the fuck?
I know, right? They're going to pick up and run with anything they have, totally disregarding that it was a cell of 12 Muslims that actually got together and pulled this off. And it actually started the day before Las Ramblas and ended in La Cambril.
Yeah.
It was 3 days that they were doing this. The only reason that we didn't hear about the first day was because those canisters were found, and that one was prevented. Otherwise, it would have been 3 days of absolute horrificness over there in Barcelona.
No, for sure. No, they've already discovered the cleric, you know, that's been stirring up all this shit. And then that's another scary thing. I mean, we could be here for hours. I love talking about this shit. The thing is, we went from our whites Hispanic to now we're talking terrorism in Spain, but they're all, unfortunately, they're all kind of related. And oh, I thought you were going to say something.
Oh, no, I was agreeing with you.
Oh, the thing is that the really sad thing is to see how so many people follow these bad ideas like a virus. It's like a mental virus for people, you know, and it's fun. Not funny. Obviously, I'm using that term loosely. It's amazing how it just takes one cleric to stir up that kind of anger. And notice the cleric wasn't driving the damn van. It's not him driving the van. He's an adult. He's going to survive. It's almost always when you look at this, it's usually young men in their early 20s. I guarantee you, they're probably sexually frustrated men with no girlfriends or wives, more than likely unemployed, you know, and it's just sad to see how, that we as a species have yet to figure these things out. I would think that by now, you know,
I call them rebels without a clue, and some people laugh when I use that term, and some people go, But I mean, it's when you indoctrinate them, especially with Islam, it's an indoctrination process. Your parents start it when you're young, so you grow up into it. And until somebody wakes you up, it's Islam, day and night, 365 days out of the year. You know, anybody that breaks away from the Islamic faith henceforth becomes an apostate, or you're an infidel if you never were in Islam. If you never practiced Islam, then you're an infidel. And you've got people that are trying to romanticize this religion that is built on conquering other nations, saying, no, they're a quote-unquote religion of peace. No, they're not. And that's where I love Imam Tawhidi, because he's on Twitter fighting against all these people that say Islam isn't what everybody says it is. And here comes Imam Tawhidi going, yes, it is. It is a violent religion. It is an intolerant religion. Yes, it is. It does do this to its women. Yes, it strips the women of rights. It does this. And he's vilified in his own culture because he's telling the truth about the Islamic faith.
No, amazing he hasn't gotten killed. You know, or I'm sure he makes good efforts.
I think it was last month that Facebook shut down his fan page and suspended him from his own personal account for a week.
What?
Because he spoke, quote unquote, out against Islam.
Wow, those are the things that are starting to get a little scary. And clearly right now we're being watched. I don't even doubt that, or that this, you know, but this has got to be spoken about. And that's okay to segue even further and talking about communism. And there's one of the people in the chat is somebody I'm going to probably have a chat with him tomorrow. Someone who somewhat sympathizes with communism, and I'm going to still talk to the guy. And yet the guy's an entrepreneur. Okay, the guy's an entrepreneur. But anyway, the point is, but that's the thing, because a lot of people misinterpret what is communism. Okay, and so I'm curious to have the conversation, and those are the things that I think are important to be able to communicate, because I think we have so much more in common than not. Anyway, one of the things that he and I had already communicated on were Marxist theories, you know, and then the idea of, you know, the means of production being owned by a small group of people, which is something that Marx was completely against, which I guess you can't blame the guy. Okay, hey, you don't want that. And of course, his idea was, oh, let's have the government, you know, all the means of production will be owned by the government, which is a fucking catastrophe. But I'm starting to see now, it looks like we're going to have a small group of people who are going to pretty much own the means of production, and they're going to be capitalists. And it seems to be the Jeff Bezos and the Richard Bransons and the Elon Musks and the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Larry Pages and Sergey Brins. It's a small little group. And you're already seeing it with the artificial intelligence, which I think to a large degree is almost inevitable. But now you're getting the universal basic income. Yeah. And they're more than happy to spread this out. And very recent, it came out, Richard Branson's already one of the first ones who supposedly is starting to already dish out cash, you know, for universal basic income, because all these jobs are going to, I mean, all these machines and stuff are going to start taking over jobs and shit. My fear is that they're almost going to want to have by public. It's a new form of welfare, and the dynamic is still there. Whether it's a state, and much less a murderous state like, you know, what was under Fidel Castro and any other communist dictator, or these uber capitalists. Speaking of Uber, Uber itself is another one. You know, and so I don't know. I'm a little scared. And then you see Elon Musk, who's constantly warning about AI, what he invests in. That's the thing. Oh my God, AI is such a threat. It's a worse threat than North Korea and even climate change. But he's investing into it. And at the same time, he's also trying to push for, hey, you know what? In due time, we're going to need to be able to insert little chips in our brain so you can actually compete in the marketplace. You know. So I don't know, like and I don't like to entertain conspiracy theories. I know this is going kind of like out there, but have you given much thought to that also, or?
No, I haven't. I'm watching the AIs and I'm learning about machine learning and things of that nature. And the intelligence is artificial in that it cannot truly learn for itself. It's learned by what it's fed, and who feeds it? Humans. So depending on the majority of the group that is feeding this machine that is learning is what it's going to perceive as good and what it's going to perceive as unacceptable. We're seeing that in large part with the algorithms that are changing now on YouTube, with a lot of people getting demonetized. The AI hasn't fully been taught yet, so a lot of people are getting hit. And this is just, don't want to say it's a small example, because YouTube is not a small platform by any means. But, it's one thing that can happen with an AI if it isn't given strict parameters with which to learn. Side note, in the side chat here in the Hangout, I put the name and the channel link of someone that you may be interested in speaking to. He's an archaeologist and an anthropologist. His name is Carlos Castrejo, and he lives in South America.
All right. No, let me, because I think you're talking about the actual side chat with the comments.
Yeah, the actual side chat. I can't put a wrench in the. I do not have a wrench.
I have yet to learn how the damn wrenches work.
You gotta go. If you hover over somebody's name in the live chat, you'll see 3 dots over to the right. Click on it, and it'll give you the option of adding a moderator. That's how you give somebody a wrench.
I see. Okay, the little 3 dots and stuff.
Yeah.
But here, let me share the screen of this guy.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna really check him out afterwards myself.
He has a lot of really good insight on Marxism and communism and things of that nature, and I think you'll have a really good conversation with him.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing. I don't want to have these knee-jerk reactions against, other ideologies. Again, it's free speech to a certain extent. You have to understand it. And this particular person who is, I wouldn't say he's a communist. It's just someone who saw one of my videos, and it was funny. Like, here's also where you have to be careful how you communicate with people. This person saw one of my videos and commented, and they were like, you should take a course in economics so you won't say such stupid things. And so of course I come back, I'm like, oh, really? Well, why don't you, enlighten me or something like that? So then he, responds back. And then the next response I'm going to give the guy, I was going to start it with an insult. I don't want to do that. Let me come back at it and I cleaned up what I was going to say. And then I kind of made it friendly, thanked him for watching the video. And then he comes back friendly to me. And now we're going to be having a chat tomorrow. And I think that's a lot of what's missing in the polarization in this country. Like, people are very quick, myself included, very quick to want to throw the punch and stuff like that. And the visceral reactions I get, like watching Francesco Ramsey and that other girl, and especially that subtle authoritarian attitude that they have, like Latinx, and yes, you should, like, don't tell me what to do, but then at the same time, you can't fight fire with fire. So
well, it's like one thing that my husband, I think, finds surprising with me is I can take myself out of a situation and I can look at it from a third person point of view. I can look at it from both sides, and I can kind of tell why they're thinking the way they're thinking, but also the fact that it's a self-defeatist way of having a movement. Because if you start segregating your movement the way they're intersectioning this particular movement and their social justice, they're going to wind up infighting, inevitably. Because you can't say, all right, we're feminists, we're fighting for women's rights. Okay, now we're fighting for black women's rights. Okay, now we're fighting for brown women's. Okay, now we're going to call them people of color. Now we're fighting for people of color's rights. And, how dare these white women fight for our feminism? So it's already started. If you look at all the different websites that, you've got the black people, the brown people, or the Asian people and the black people trying to separate themselves from the white people because apparently somewhere along the line, white people became evil for some reason, unbeknownst to me. And now everybody's getting blamed for the slavery that happened over 400 years ago, even though we had nothing to do with it. And it's like, the white Anglo-Saxon people are standing here in the middle going, when did I wake up to this?
No, yeah. Which, by the way, that was another point I wanted to get into, like what it means to be white. And I think what a lot of people really are talking about is Anglo-Saxon. I think that's the Anglo heritage. And at least for me, that's what I always kind of assumed also when I would say gringo and stuff like that. Interesting thing is, for that magazine that I used to work for, where they tried to, indoctrinate me into fucking Castro being a hero, I got to travel the world. I got to travel a lot. And one of the countries that I went to was Latvia. And it was interesting in Latvia, I just assumed, since they're so close to Scandinavia, I thought that they were Scandinavian, they're blonde hair, blue-eyed for the most part and stuff like that. And I remember asking one of them, I was like, hey, so you guys Scandinavian? And he was like, no, we are Baltic. I was like, what's the fucking difference? So it's interesting. Like, people don't realize that. You go to Europe, they divide themselves just the same. Like, the whites, you got the Scandinavians versus the Baltics. And then the Baltics versus the Balkans. And like I was telling you before, that guy, the Greek, the Greek guy, which I knew Greece is part of the Balkan area, because whenever I think about Balkans, I think of more like Croatia and stuff like that. And so it's just a shame that so many people don't realize that these are just tribal and territorial tendencies manifesting themselves. And yeah, I think we just need to learn how to keep these things in check. And the only way to do it is through accurate information. The only way you get the accurate information is the communication.
Always one person in the voice chat that he'll speak and somebody else in the voice chat will go, "Are you Irish?" And immediately, "No, I'm Scottish."
And I remember that also in England, the Scottish versus the English. It seemed like the Irish, the Scottish, they couldn't stand the English. The English were pretty indifferent because they were like, "Yeah, fuck it, we conquered you people anyway." And then the Welsh, the Welsh are like, "Look, we'll stick with Tom Jones and Catherine Zeta-Jones and shit like that." And it is amazing the way that people just further divide themselves. And then coming back to Cuba, when it's really scary is when it's okay. Now it's not just blacks versus whites, and now you got the whites who further divided themselves. Now you got actual families dividing themselves over political or religious reasons.
Yeah,
I've seen in my own family, and I know there's a solution to this all. I know that there's got to be a way, because again, I don't think that we're going to end up with a civil war. It would be a shame is this losing YouTube.
Yeah,
I would really hate to lose YouTube, and it is such a marketplace of ideas. Like, I'm already at the point where I don't care to make money anymore off this. I do this now just because I love it, And
yeah, yeah, I see it too, and I agree with you. It's not so much a civil war. It's going to take a president in this country that is truly into unifying this country again, because let's face it, Obama divided it. When BLM started raising his head, he ignored BLM, and he basically agreed with them on some of the points on what they were protesting against. And that started the major division in the country, and it's just snowballed from there.
Yeah. No, and I think also the thing with Obama, unlike Glenn Beck, you see, that's where you want to the nuance and calibrating it. Because I'll never forget Glenn Beck, and I actually wrote for Glenn Beck. I wrote for him for a little bit. I wrote for his magazine and stuff. I never met the man, but back when he said Obama doesn't like white people, that was the time I was writing for the guy. And I remember thinking to myself, holy shit, I don't want to be associated with him now, with Glenn Beck. I don't want to let people know I write for this guy. I think he took it a little too far, but I can really sense that. And again, this is my opinion. I think Obama was trying to even a score. I think there was a score in his head that he was trying to even.
Yeah.
And I think with people, especially someone like Al Sharpton going to the White House, I don't know how many times, and almost being like an advisor, having that guy, whispering shit into your ear, that did not help. And it was interesting because doing a little bit of research today on the whole thing of what we're going to be talking about, especially are Hispanics white, and tying it into Trayvon Martin, at least in Wikipedia, they're mentioning it. If you look up Trayvon Martin on Wikipedia and you go down to, I think it's the media here, I might as well just read it myself. At least they do talk about how after he was shot, how his family, they actually had someone here. Let me just read it so I don't fucking misquote anything. Bottom line is they went and they contacted the media. And, that's when it started to become a circus. And Black Lives Matter is directly tied to the whole thing with Trayvon Martin because it was born of the verdict. Which, by the way, I always thought, look, again, nuance. If they were going to try George Zimmerman for anything, I would have thought it would have been for reckless endangerment, at the very least.
Oh, yeah.
But that's so much lost in that.
Oh, I frustrated a lot of friends with that case because we would discuss it, and they're like, what are your views? If he would have just kept his butt in the car, none of this would have ever happened.
Yeah. No, for sure. And then that was the other thing, when this happened, it happened in 2012, and I was moving from New York City to Miami. And again, what an interesting divide in the perspective on how that story was being seen. Because up in New York, for sure, Trayvon Martin is a kid with the Skittles in his pocket and all that. It wasn't until I got to Miami that I realized, no, what are you talking about? The guy had a grill. Did you see not his Facebook? And I got like a completely different perspective of Trayvon Martin once I was in Miami, and especially down here in Florida, you know, because here people are like, dude, let's really, really put this into perspective. We do not need any more race riots, you know? Yeah. And then here in Miami in 2015, what's this guy's name? Louis Farrakhan at a church, you know, basically calling for a race war. And I put that into, well, let me not say I put it into one of my videos, because obviously I got it from someone else. Yeah, it's out there. I mean, there's no secret to that, you know, that Louis Farrakhan was giving that speech. And then you see the people in the stands and how they get, and with, you know, punching of the fist, and they're ready to go. Actually, I'm going to probably show that one. But here, let me read really quick with Trayvon Martin. Martin's parents. Okay, so in Wikipedia, there's a section called Aftermath and Media Discourse. Oh, and by the way, if you got to take off, if we're already going too long, let me know.
I got a few more minutes.
Okay, yeah. And then I'll wrap it up. So it's under Aftermath and Media Discourse. So Martin's parents, upset that an arrest had not been made in their son's death, contacted Martin's sister-in-law, an attorney who put them in touch with Benjamin Crump, a civil rights attorney from Tallahassee, Florida. Crump took their case pro bono and retained Natalie Jackson, an attorney familiar with Sanford and Seminole County, who specialized in women and children's cases, to help with the Martin case. On March 5th, Jackson asked Ryan Jewelison to help out as well. A publicist, Jewelison initially approached several national media contacts about covering the shooting. Over the next few days and weeks, the national media started reporting on the shooting, including Reuters, CBS, This America. And so, yeah, that's how they sometimes take these things. Now, granted, I can only imagine Trayvon Martin's parents must have been out of their minds. I mean, ultimately, it's their kid who was killed, you know, and in that sense, you know, I try to look at this from as neutral a perspective as possible.
Yeah.
But clearly, once the media got a hold of this. And the other thing is also, I find it, sorry, yeah. And here's the other thing. It was an election year. 2012.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing again with Black Lives Matter. This came out with the whole thing with Philando Castile and everything that happened last year. Again, an election year.
Yeah.
You know? And so, yeah, the opportunism is so obvious that it's just amazing to me that more people don't see it. And that makes me wonder how many people in the media willingly play along with that.
Well, I mean, to me, it's a combination of people wanting that 15 minutes of fame and the media losing the narrative of staying as objective as possible. Because I still remember all the photos. It wasn't until I was online doing digging that I saw photos of Trayvon Martin out of his football uniform, out of the, hey, this is a stand-up kid that got shot kind of narrative, and actually saw the other pictures of Trayvon. This wasn't a small kid.
Yeah.
You know, by any means. And, you know, it's like I saw the whole story, and while everybody was sitting there arguing over the Florida Stand Your Ground law, I'm sitting here going, okay, there's two things that are standing out in my mind. Number one, 911 told him to stay in the vehicle, not to pursue, not to follow him, to stay in his vehicle, and he didn't do that. The second thing he kept saying was that he was a part of the neighborhood watch. Okay, if he was a part of the neighborhood watch, why did nobody in the neighborhood know who he was?
Yeah.
That was the one thing that stuck out in my head, because I remember how neighborhood watches are supposed to work. Everybody had meetings, everybody gathered in a different house every week, you know, and, you know, what are we doing to keep our street safe? You know, what's been going on? So you know your neighbors.
Right.
So for people to say, you know, well, we don't even know who George Zimmerman is, we've never seen him before, it was like, okay, that's a red flag. He's lying about being a part of this neighborhood watch. You know, and also, too, if he was part of the neighborhood watch and Trayvon was a part of the neighborhood, he would have recognized Trayvon.
Yeah, look, I never heard that perspective. You know?
Yeah, I mean, That was one of the small details that got obscured that stuck in my mind, that one of his things was that he kept telling people he was a member of the Neighborhood Watch, but nobody in the neighborhood knew him.
Yeah. No, I mean, clearly, I look at the whole thing with Trayvon Martin. It's a tragedy through and through. I mean, however you want to slice it, you know, whether he attacked George Zimmerman or whether George Zimmerman or the burglaries that were supposedly going on in that neighborhood and all that. I mean, no matter how you slice it, but the real that tragedy became a travesty.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and here's the last thing, and then after that we'll get off and we just show this one little video of Louis Farrakhan, and this is the danger that I see. You know, speaking of, we were talking about before of a civil war and stuff like that. Let me get this this little video clip up, and it more than anything, it's the crowd. It's just look at the crowd. I mean, because that is what scares me. It's that mob mentality that you get. You know, and hold on, I'm just queuing it up right now. And so here we go.
I'm looking for 10,000 in the midst of a million.
Listen. Punching his fist.
I'm looking for 10,000 in the midst of the million. 10,000 fearless men.
Fearless.
Say, death is sweeter than continued life under tyranny.
Where's the chair?
Death is sweeter than to continue to live, bury our children, while white folks give the killer hamburgers.
And they're talking about the
retaliation is prescribed in matters of the slain. Retaliation is a prescription from God to calm the breath of those whose children have been slain. So if the federal government will not intercede in our affairs, then we must rise up and kill those who kill us. Stop them and kill them and let them feel the pain of death that we are feeling.
That is fucked up. And so, yeah, and then you see how people are just like standing up and no problem cheering that on. And by the way, we were talking before about like Malcolm X. I don't know the connections right off the top of my head, but if I'm not mistaken, I don't know to what degree Louis Farrakhan had in the role of Malcolm X being executed.
I don't know what role he had either.
But nonetheless, it's that same dynamic with the Imam in Barcelona, and of course with ISIS overall. Louis Farrakhan ain't doing the killing himself. He's literally calling for it. He's literally calling for well, I'm paraphrasing everything I played it, for a few good men. I mean, for men who feel that death is sweeter. It's just, and that's just so scary. And the last thing I was going to say about that, 2015, here in my city. This is why I make these videos. We need to communicate this shit, you know, and to stomp this fucking out. But anyway, so maybe we should wrap it up now. Is there anything you want to promote or anything you want to talk about?
Well, for those that are interested, my little things in the live chat, my channel Monday through Friday at 10:30 in the morning. I present the news, weather, and my 2 cents. And when I start my 2 cents, I let you know. I try to present the news without any slant as much as I possibly can. And even if I read the news or hear the news that I play and I feel it's bullshit, I call it out. So that's pretty much what I've been doing.
Cool. Well, no, I'm definitely starting to follow your channel now and definitely subscribe to it and all that. And yeah, I guess I never know how to end these things. I'm gonna end it with thank you all for watching. I'm sorry I didn't invite people on. I'm starting to learn that sometimes it's best to just keep one person, two people at best on these, because then people just talk over each other. And even with all the notes that I had, we still wandered around and stuff. But I think we stuck to the general subject, and it was great. Thanks so much for being on, Maddie. I really appreciate it. And
thank you for inviting me on. I had a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, and that concludes the Wednesday night live stream. Thanks for watching.
All right.